It was dark. March in Spokane bites cold. An old man was running through the streets calling his granddaughter's name. She had been gone for hours. She was 9 years old. He and another man were moving fast, checking every corner, every shadow, when headlights came screaming around a bend on Belt Street. The car was moving too fast. Both men threw themselves out of the way. The car never slowed down. The driver never looked back. Nobody ever found out who was behind that wheel. But somewhere in that same darkness, on that same night, in that same city, a little girl named Candy was already gone. The man who took her lived 1 mile away. He knew her name, he knew her face. He had sat in her family's living room and looked at photographs of the child he had murdered, while her relatives sat right beside him. For 62 years, not one person knew his name, until a dead man's own daughter handed detectives the key. Today's case is the Candy Rogers cold case. Her full name was Candace Elaine Rogers, but everyone called her Candy. She was 9 years old, blonde hair, blue eyes, 4 feet 4 inches tall, 60 pounds, small for her age. The kind of little girl who looked even younger than she was. Candy lived with her mother, Elaine Rogers, in an apartment above a neighborhood grocery store at 2106.5 West Mission Avenue in the west central neighborhood of Spokane, Washington. Elaine was a physical education teacher at Meade High School. She also coached the boys' tennis team. She raised Candy largely with the help of Candy's grandparents, who were a constant presence in their lives. Candy was Elaine's only child. She was a 4th grader at Holmes Elementary School, the same school her mother had attended as a girl. She was a proud member of the Bluebirds, the junior division of the Campfire Girls of America. Just like the Girl Scouts sold cookies, the Bluebirds sold mints. On the afternoon of March 6, 1959, Candy came home from school, went to the backyard, and played with the family dog. She came inside, sat down, and ate an oatmeal cookie. Then she picked up 7 boxes of Campfire Girls mints, kissed her mother goodbye, and walked out the front door. Elaine had one rule: be home before dark. On March 6, 1959, sunset in Spokane fell at approximately 5:45 in the evening. Candy never saw it. The neighborhood that afternoon was flooded with bluebirds. Candy was not the only Campfire Girl out selling mints in west central Spokane that day. Dozens of girls moved through the same streets, knocked on the same doors. Many neighbors reported seeing Candy as she made her rounds, but nobody tracked exactly where she went or when she stopped. What detectives would later piece together is this. At some point that afternoon, Candy sold exactly 1 of her 7 boxes. The remaining 6 would tell the most chilling story of the evening. When Candy did not come home before dark, her grandfather did not wait. He and another man went out immediately, moving through the streets, calling her name, checking every corner and every shadow. They were on Belt Street when a vehicle came around a bend at speed, far too fast. Both men threw themselves out of the way. The car did not stop. Detective Zach Storment would later say it remains unknown whether the driver of that vehicle was Candy's killer. Think about that. Her own grandfather may have thrown himself out of the path of the man who had already taken her. By 9 o'clock, police had been called, and volunteers discovered something that confirmed every fear that had been building since sunset. 6 of Candy's 7 mint boxes found strewn along North Pettit Drive, scattered along the route Spokane runners know today as Doomsday Hill, near the T.J. Minack Bridge over the Spokane River. The boxes had not been dropped. They had been thrown from a moving vehicle. Whether Candy threw them deliberately, hoping someone would see, hoping someone would follow the trail, nobody has ever been able to say. Detective Storment said plainly that he did not know. He said he could not shed any light on that, and he did not know that anyone ever would. Those 6 boxes were the last trace of Candy Rogers alive. By morning on March 7th, all of Spokane knew. Every available officer, detective, and deputy was assigned. The Marine Corps came, the Boy Scouts came, the United States Postal Workers came. Volunteers turned out on motorcycles, horseback, cars, and aircraft, combing the area from Fort George Wright Bridge all the way out to 9 Mile Falls. The Bishop of Spokane, Bernard Topple, and Episcopal Bishop Russell Hubbard made public pleas through every media outlet available. They begged anyone with information to bring it forward to a priest or minister under confidential privilege. Nobody came forward. On the final weekend of the search, 1,200 people turned out in a single day to scour the area. 1,200 people, stopping everything. Saying this child matters more than any of it. Then the search cost more lives. Less than 24 hours after Candy disappeared, a United States Air Force Sikorsky H-919 helicopter from Fairchild Air Force Base joined the aerial search. Flying over the Spokane River Canyon, it struck high-tension power lines. The helicopter went down into the river. 3 men died. Lieutenant Kenneth G. Fodek, Staff Sergeant William A. McDonnell, Airman Marlis D. Ray. 3 men, with families, with lives, with nothing to do with what happened to Candy Rogers, paid with everything they had, just trying to bring a 9-year-old girl home. The search continued. 16 days after Candy walked out of her front door, 2 off-duty airmen from Fairchild Air Force Base went hunting in the woods off Old Trails Road, northwest of Spokane, 7 miles from Candy's home. They were not part of any organized search. They noticed something on the ground. A pair of girls' blue suede shoes. They kept walking. But they could not stop thinking about it. On the way back to base, they kept asking each other, what if those shoes belonged to the missing girl? They went back. They reported what they found. And as daylight broke on March 22, 1959, a search party descended on those woods. Only minutes in, they found her. Candy Rogers lay buried under a shallow layer of pine needles and brush, 130 feet off Old Trails Road, 7 miles from the apartment where she had kissed her mother goodbye 18 days earlier. A strip of her own clothing had been used to bind her feet. Another strip tied around her neck as a ligature. The cause of death was strangulation. Her autopsy confirmed signs of sexual assault. She was 9 years old. What nobody tells you about a cold case is that the murder does not end with the victim. It radiates outward. It keeps killing long after the crime is over. Candy was Elaine Rogers' only child. Candy's father, Carl Rogers Jr., was not even in Spokane when it happened. He and Elaine had been divorced for years. He was in Milton Freewater, Oregon, when his daughter was murdered. He received the news from a distance. 4 years later, in June 1963, Carl Rogers Jr. checked into a hotel room in Walla Walla, Washington. He was 44 years old. He died alone. Elaine Rogers never remarried. She carried the weight of her daughter's unsolved murder through the 1960s, the 1970s, the 1980s, the 1990s, into the 2000s. She died in September 2006 at the age of 83. She never knew who took Candy from her. Neither parent lived to see justice. The investigation expanded in every direction it could go. There was no DNA testing in 1959, no sex offender registry, no security cameras, no digital footprint of any kind. Just detective work, interviews, tips, physical evidence, and the grinding process of elimination. Hundreds of tips came in from across Washington state and beyond. A prime suspect eventually emerged. A man named Hugh Morse, already serving a life sentence for 2 other homicides from 1959 and 1960. In the early 2000s, forensic scientists isolated a DNA sample from Candy's clothing and entered a full genetic profile into CODIS, the National Criminal DNA Database. They ran Hugh Morse. He was excluded entirely. The real killer had never been in the system. The case passed from detective to detective inside the Major Crimes Unit like a torch no one was willing to drop. The community never forgot, but the case had no answers. And somewhere in that same city, living an ordinary life, raising a family, the man who took Candy Rogers had no idea that the answer to all of it was buried inside his own body. His name was John Ray Hoff. He was born on August 11, 1938. He grew up on the 2500 block of West College Avenue in Spokane's West Central neighborhood, the same side of the city, 1 mile from Candy Rogers' home. His early life showed every warning sign. In 1955, at 16 years old, he escaped from a state boys training camp near Olympia, Washington. He and 3 others were tracked down near Yakima and returned. The system processed him. Life continued. At 17, he enlisted in the United States Army. He was assigned to the Nike missile sites protecting Fairchild Air Force Base from aerial attack during the Cold War. By the evening of March 6, 1959, Hoff was 20 years old, living at 2211 West Broadway Avenue, exactly 1 mile from Candy's home. And here is the detail that changes everything. Hoff's stepsister was 10 years old in 1959. She was a member of the Camp Fire Girls. And within that organization, she had been assigned as Candy Rogers' big sister. John Ray Hoff did not encounter a stranger on a street corner. He knew who Candy Rogers was. He had heard her name. He had likely seen her face. He knew what she looked like and what she would be doing that afternoon. He did not find a victim, he chose one. After he took her, after he did what he did 7 miles from her home off Old Trails Road, he went back to his life. In the years that followed, in the ordinary movement of daily life in Spokane, Hoff's family and Candy's family ended up as neighbors. On Rosewood Avenue. Not across the city, not in a different neighborhood, next door. Candy's family kept a thick scrapbook. Every newspaper article, every headline, every photograph printed about her case. It was how they held on to her. And at some point, because neighbors visit each other, Hoff and his wife sat in the living room of the Rogers family. Someone brought out the scrapbook. The man who murdered Candy Rogers sat beside her family and looked at photographs of the child he had killed. Candy's cousin, John Geisbush, reflected on it years later. He said the man had probably gotten his nose rubbed in it without the person doing the rubbing ever knowing. And maybe, he said, that increased whatever stress the man was carrying inside himself. Whatever it did to Hoff, it did not move him to confess. 2 years after Candy's murder, Hoff attacked again. In 1961, in Spokane's Browns Addition neighborhood, he was convicted of assault in the 2nd degree. He had accosted a woman, forcibly removed her clothing, bound her with her own garments, strangled her, then fled before she died. The same method, the same sequence, the same cruelty. The victim survived. John Ray Hoff was sentenced to 6 months in jail. 6 months. For strangulation. For an attack that mirrored in nearly every detail the murder of a 9-year-old girl that all of Spokane was still trying to solve. He served his time. He walked out. The military declared him a deserter and dishonorably discharged him from the army. In the years that followed, he sold Cutco cutlery door to door, worked at Western Pine Lumber, and took a job at the Armor Meat Packing Plant. He married, he had children, he became to everyone around him an ordinary man. On June 30th, 1970, at his home on the 5000 block of West Rosewood Avenue, John Ray Hoff shot himself in the head. He was rushed to Holy Family Hospital, where he died. He was 31 years old. His daughter, who would grow up to be known as Kathy Baird, was a young girl at the time. For decades, she believed her father died from depression. She had no idea what he had done. The secret appeared to die with him. But the Spokane Police Department was not done. The case moved through the hands of generation after generation of detectives. Each one inherited the file, read every page, and felt the same pull as the ones before them. Detective Brian Hammond took ownership and made it his personal mission. Cold cases are not really in the forefront, he said. You just pick at them when you get a chance. He picked at this one for the better part of his career. In 2020, the degraded DNA sample was taken to a private forensic laboratory. The lab examined it and said the same thing nobody wanted to hear. Too damaged, too far gone. They declined the case and walked away. When Hammond retired in 2021, Sergeant Zach Storment inherited the file. He called it the Mount Everest of their cold cases. The one they could never seem to overcome, but the one, he said, that nobody ever forgot. When asked how many hours had been spent on the case across 6 decades, Storment gave the only honest answer. This is not measured in hours. It is measured in careers. And then, from a direction nobody expected, everything changed. Washington State Patrol forensic scientist Brittany Wright had been working a separate case in Bremerton, Washington, when she came across a laboratory in Texas through cold case investigator Paul Holes, known for his role in identifying the Golden State Killer. Holes had worked with a company called Othram, based in the Woodlands, Texas. Othram had built its entire operation around the cases everyone else had given up on. Their method, forensic-grade genome sequencing, was designed specifically to reconstruct DNA profiles from samples so damaged that conventional labs could not touch them. Wright mentioned it to Storment. Storment reached out. Othram agreed to take the case. The DNA extract arrived at their laboratory in March 2021. Forensic genealogists went to work. rebuilding a genetic profile fragment by fragment from 62-year-old evidence, searching genealogy databases, mapping family trees across generations. On Labor Day, September 6, 2021, Othram returned their results. 3 brothers, John Ray Hoff, James Andrew Hoff, Terry Allen Hoff, all 3 were dead. But one of them, the oldest, had a living child. John Ray Hoff had never once been a suspect in 62 years of investigation. His name had never appeared in a single tip, a single interview, a single direction the case had ever traveled. Until now. Detectives tracked down his daughter, Kathy Baird. When she understood what they were telling her, that her father was a suspect in the murder of a 9-year-old girl, she did not hesitate. She did not call a lawyer. She did not ask for time. She dropped everything and met with investigators immediately. She submitted her DNA voluntarily. Forensic scientist Brittany Wright ran the analysis. The results came back on September 8, 2021. The DNA from Candy's clothing was 2.9 million times more likely to belong to a relative of the suspect profile than to any random member of the public. Investigators needed a direct sample from Hoff himself, and Hoff had been in the ground since 1970. A search warrant was executed on John Ray Hoff's grave on September 23, 2021. Stormont and Wright stood above the burial site as the body was exhumed. And in the distance, visible from exactly where they stood, was Candy Rogers' mausoleum. Stormont said they could kind of tell her in a sense that they knew. The final DNA results came back. The match was 25 quintillion times more likely to belong to John Ray Hoff than to any random member of the public. 25 quintillion. Case closed. 62 years later. On the morning of November 19, 2021, Spokane Police Chief Craig Meidel stood before the press and said what needed to be said. He called it exactly what it was: a kidnapping of an innocent 9-year-old who was brutally and violently assaulted and murdered. A 9-year-old, he said, who had absolutely no concept of the evil that exists. At that press conference, a video statement from Kathy Baird was played for the room. She told everyone watching that she had always believed her father died because of depression. She had carried that for 50 years. Then she said the words that stopped the room. Now I think no, he was evil. It was an escape. She looked into the camera and said she was very, very sorry for what her father had done. He took her life horribly, she said. He took her mother's life. He took her father's life. He took more lives than one. A second relative of Candy, identified only as Cheryl, also spoke at that press conference on behalf of a family that had been waiting since 1959. And Joanne Poss, one of the only surviving members of Candy's family who still remembered her, gave the most honest statement anyone could give after 62 years of waiting. It is not closure, she said, but at least there is some form of satisfaction knowing the person that did it is named. He may be in a grave, but he is named. Joanne was 13 years old when she lost her cousin. She watched her aunt Elaine die in 2006 without ever knowing. She watched the case come close to answers and fall back into silence more times than she could count. And in November 2021, the answer finally came. Not handcuffs, not a trial, not a verdict, just a name, and the end of not knowing. Joanne Poss's granddaughter was 19 years old when the case was solved. She had grown up hearing her grandmother talk about Candy. When she watched forensic science do in 2021 what 62 years of detective work alone could not, something shifted in her. She enrolled in forensic science studies at Gonzaga University in Spokane. She is building her career around the very technology that finally gave her family the answer they spent a lifetime waiting for. The case was featured on Cold Case Files, Season 4, Episode 17, titled The Campfire Mint Murder. It aired on A&E on March 7, 2025, narrated by Bill Curtis. It is available on Apple TV and Prime Video. Candy Rogers was buried at Riverside Memorial Park in Spokane, Washington. She was 9 years old, 4 feet 4 inches tall, 60 pounds, blonde hair, blue eyes, her mother's only child, a 4th grader at Holmes Elementary, a bluebird in the Campfire Girls. On the afternoon of March 6, 1959, she came home from school, played with her dog, and ate an oatmeal cookie. Then she kissed her mother goodbye and walked out the front door. She never got to see the sunset that evening. But 62 years, 8 months and 13 days later, in a laboratory in Texas, in a detective's office in Spokane, and at a graveside where a killer had been buried for half a century, the truth finally caught up with the dark. Before you go, Candy's father could not survive not knowing. He was gone within 4 years. Her mother spent 47 years hoping for an answer that never came. 3 men died in a river canyon just trying to find her. And detectives spent not hours, not months, but entire careers on this one file. There are more cases out there. More families sitting in that same silence. This channel exists to make sure those stories get told and those people are not forgotten. If this story meant something to you, consider subscribing to Just Crime Talks. We document cases so they are not forgotten. Her name was Candace Elaine Rogers. She was 4 feet 4 inches tall. She ate an oatmeal cookie before she left. Do not let her be forgotten.